Hey guys, tonight we're diving into a part of history that your teachers never told you about. Not pharaohs, not pyramids. No, tonight we're tackling how the ancient Egyptians really got drunk. One of the most sacred rituals involved getting so drunk you forgot your own name. And they did it every year, on purpose. And if you think that's bad, wait until you find out why Egyptian toddlers were drunk before they could even walk. If you're enjoying these sleepy history journeys, I'd really appreciate a quick like or even a subscribe. It helps way more than you know. And hey, I'm always curious where you're tuning in from. Drop a comment with your city and what time it is for you. Now grab your clay cup, because the festival of drunkenness is about to begin. You've just woken up face down in the sand outside the Temple of Hathor. The good news? You're still wearing most of your tunic. The bad news? The festival of drunkenness is only halfway over. The taste in your mouth is a blend of sour beer, baked barley and regret. There's a garland of lotus flowers draped over your neck that you definitely don't remember putting on, and someone's goat is staring at you like you owe it an apology. You sit up slowly. Your head hums with the hangover of 1,000 sun gods. Somewhere nearby, a drum starts beating again, deep, slow and persistent. A reminder that the party never really ends in ancient Egypt. It just pauses for a breath, and maybe a sacred vomit behind a pillar. Across the courtyard, priests are pouring beer into offering basins, women are dancing with bronze cymbals, and someone is already passed out beneath the statue of Hathor. You're not sure if that someone was your friend last night or a stranger, but either way, you nod in solidarity. Historically speaking, this isn't an exaggeration. The festival of drunkenness was a real religious event, held to honour Hathor, goddess of joy, fertility, music, and yes, intoxication. The festival reenacted a myth in which Sekhmet, goddess of destruction, nearly wiped out humanity. Only a vat of blood-coloured beer, dumped across the land, distracted her long enough for her to forget her divine rampage. In ancient Egypt, that was worth celebrating. With beer, lots of it. You stumble to your feet. A priest hands you a clay cup filled with thick, lukewarm beer, cloudy and pulpy, like someone fermented breakfast soup. You drink it anyway. It tastes like barley, sweat, and something vaguely floral. You're not even mad. This is normal. Beer isn't just for parties. In this world, it's daily sustenance, as essential as bread and easier to swallow than Nile water, which is trying to kill you slowly. Rich or poor, drunk or divine, everyone drinks it. Children are raised on diluted mash. Farmers get paid in jugs. Even the afterlife has a tab. You wander through the crowd, catching glimpses of dancers with tattoos swirling on their arms, vendors selling honey-drenched cakes, and an old man vomiting respectfully behind a statue of Bastet. No one bats an eye. Everyone here understands this is a holy mess. In truth, brewing was a deeply ingrained part of Egyptian life. Women, particularly those associated with temples, brewed the majority of beer using emmer wheat, date paste, and sometimes herbs or spices. Brewing wasn't just labour, it was sacred craft. And the results weren't served in neat glasses with foam on top. Egyptian beer was more like barley porridge, chunky, alive, and served with a straw to avoid floating solids. You pass a group of musicians who are playing long harps and clapping rhythmically. Someone offers you a fig. You eat it in 2 bites. Your stomach immediately regrets both of them. Beyond the temple gates, the city buzzes. Somewhere, a scribe is probably penning a hymn to Hathor, praising her divine intoxication. Somewhere else, a farmer is sipping on his 10th jug while trying to remember which direction the fields are. You, meanwhile, are wondering how you'll ever explain to your boss why your hair is sticky and your tunic smells like beer and goose fat. Historically, we know that intoxication wasn't just tolerated. It was actively woven into spiritual life. Beer offerings were left in tombs. Gods like Osiris and Thoth were offered fermented drink in exchange for wisdom, protection, or just a decent harvest. There were even papyrus texts explaining which herbs to soak in beer to treat fevers, stomach aches, and in some cases, heartbreak. Your hangover deepens. The heat settles on your shoulders like a judgment from Ra himself. But another priest appears, smiling wide, handing you yet another drink. This one smells slightly floral, maybe infused with blue lotus, the sacred psychoactive that added a little kick to religious ceremonies. You sip. The world gets warmer. The drums get louder. The goat returns. You might not survive the day, but at least you'll be blessed doing it. And so begins your descent into divine inebriation, where beer is prayer, sleep is sacrifice, and the hangover is, well, eternal. But before your stomach fully revolts, we're going to peel back the layers of this boozy civilization one clay jug at a time. Next, we'll talk about what happens when the brewery is your workplace, your temple, and your breakfast table, all rolled into one sticky, sacred operation. Because in ancient Egypt, sobriety was optional. You wake up before the sun, lungs already sticky with the weight of Nile humidity. The brewery is quiet now, just a few croaking frogs and the rustle of rats doing their final rounds before the humans take over. You pull on your linen wrap, still damp from yesterday's sweat and barley crust, and shuffle barefoot across the temple courtyard. You don't work in the drinking halls, not yet. That's for the honoured, the seasoned, the priestesses who can pour a jug without spilling a drop or starting a divine incident. No, you work where the magic happens before the magic happens. Deep in the stone-walled brewery kitchen, where beer is born in bubbling heat and questionable decisions. Your job? Making sure it doesn't explode. Historically, this job was as essential as it was disgusting. Ancient Egyptian beer wasn't brewed like today's bubbly bar fare. It was thick, porridge-like, fermented barley soup. Emmer wheat was baked into half-cooked bread loaves, soaked in warm water, and left to ferment using airborne yeast and sheer optimism. If you added too much yeast, or didn't chant the right prayer to Khnum, god of creation and rivers, you might wake up to a room full of sour sludge. Or worse, gods offended by your lack of brewing skill. You enter the fermentation room. It smells like damp socks, warm dates, and vinegar, which means it's working. Sort of. The mash pits are already warm to the touch. You test the temperature by dipping in your elbow, because thermometers haven't been invented and fingers are considered too precious to lose to boiling goo. It's hot. Not burn your skin off hot, but hot enough to trigger a priest's lecture if you let it go one more hour. You begin grinding the roasted barley with a stone slab, elbow grease and all. The rhythmic crunch, crunch, crunch sounds like music. If music were composed entirely by tired teenagers with hangovers and ear infections, but you grind anyway. The gods demand tribute, the temple demands beer, and you'd rather not be assigned to crocodile latrine duty. The worst part, no matter how precise you are, the yeast still has final say. Some batches bubble happily, giving off a sweet bread-like aroma. Others hiss like cursed snakes and release fumes so foul they make a goat faint. You've lost 3 tunics and 1 pair of eyebrows to the fermentation process this month alone. One priest swears he saw a frog walk backward after inhaling your first attempt. And yet, somehow, the gods forgive. Or ignore. Hard to tell the difference. In reality, brewing wasn't just physical labour. It was spiritual insurance. Beer was used as an offering in nearly every major ritual, from funerals to feasts to appeasing particularly cranky crocodile gods. Brewing failures weren't just a waste of grain, they were spiritual risks. A batch gone sour might mean a message wasn't delivered to the afterlife, or that the household's ancestors would go thirsty in the field of reeds. You spend the rest of the morning straining yesterday's mash through palm fibre baskets. The result is cloudy, foamy, and filled with suspicious lumps. You skim them off, most of them, probably enough. Around midday, the priestess comes in for a sample. She lifts the bowl to her nose, sips slowly and nods. No fainting, no hissing, no divine retribution. That's a win. You'll sleep inside tonight, and maybe even get a second helping of lentils. But just as you're basking in the success, a shadow falls across the doorway. A high priest enters. He carries a scroll and a sour expression. You already know what this means. Tomorrow the temple hosts a funeral, an important one, and the gods demand fresh beer, strong, clean, pure, not frog-infused, not fermented failure. The priest turns to you. You'll brew it. Your stomach tightens. Tonight, no sleep, just barley, fire, prayers, and a 1,000-year tradition hanging in the balance. Because if you mess this up, if your beer dishonours the dead, you won't just lose your job. You might become the next offering. You're standing in the desert sun, sweating through linen, staring at a clay jug full of beer. The man it was brewed for is already dead. He's lying just a few steps away, painted, perfumed, and wrapped tighter than a tax collector's purse strings. His tomb smells like incense and dry rot. The stone around him is etched with hieroglyphs, spells, and a suspicious number of cows. You're not here to cry, you're here to drink and feed the dead. Welcome to the after party. Historically, Egyptians didn't just honour the dead with prayers, they threw banquets. Lavish, wild, tear and sweat-soaked funeral feasts, complete with beer, music, dancing girls, roasted goose, and more beer. Because in ancient Egypt, what you drank after someone died was just as important as what they drank before. Death wasn't the end. It was a long journey into the afterlife, a journey powered by liquid courage, fermented offerings, and serious carbs. The better the booze, the smoother the transition to the field of reeds, Egypt's version of paradise, complete with endless barley fields and rivers that didn't smell like dead fish. So today, you're not just a mourner. You're a participant in an ancient, sacred, slightly rowdy tradition. You're going to help launch a soul into eternity, one sip at a time. The priest motions toward the offering table. It's stacked with ceramic jugs, glazed and sealed with reed-wrapped stoppers. You help carry them in, arms aching from the weight of this man's afterlife pantry. Each jar is labelled with ink and prayer. One says beer for strength, another says beer for joy. A third simply reads in case of emergency. That one's your favourite. You uncork one jug and the smell hits you. Warm, earthy, fermented wheat with a sour tang and a hint of honey. Not bad. Better than most of what you drink alive. Someone passes you a cup, clay, hand-moulded, chipped. You toast toward the tomb and sip. It's thick, chewy, full-bodied in the way only pre-modern hygiene can offer. You find yourself biting something halfway through the cup. Probably grain, possibly beetle. No one seems alarmed. You drink anyway. Real talk. Beer was the drink of funerals. Tomb walls across Egypt are covered in paintings of brewers, bakers, and booze. In fact, some of the earliest records of brewing anywhere come from funerary contexts. One particularly detailed tomb, belonging to the noblewoman Meketra circa 2000 BCE, included wooden models of entire brewery scenes, tiny brewers mashing grain, carrying jugs, and offering them to the gods. These weren't toys, they were insurance. If the soul needed beer in the next world, these little scenes would magically spring to life. Because heaven, after all, is not dry. Back at the funeral, the mood shifts. The mourners begin to sing, low, rhythmic, half wail, half prayer. The sound vibrates in your ribs. Someone hands you bread shaped like a goose. You eat it without asking questions. A group of dancers enters, faces painted white, arms twirling like vines in wind, hips swaying to a drum beat that seems to come from the stone itself. They move between the mourners like smoke, graceful, sorrowful, beautiful. One of them catches your eye and smiles. For a second you forget this is a funeral. and then someone starts pouring beer directly into the sand, you jolt. That's the good stuff. But it's not a mistake, it's tradition. Factually, the Egyptians believed in feeding the ka, the spiritual essence of a person. The ka needed sustenance in the afterlife, just like the body did in this one. Offerings of bread, meat, fruit and beer were made not just at funerals, but on anniversaries, feast days, and every single festival where the dead might be watching. Pouring beer into the ground wasn't wasteful, it was generous. It was feeding the spirit, hydrating the soul, giving your ancestors a drink when the Nile was far away and eternity was just getting started. The only problem? Sometimes the beer went bad. You remember the story from last month. A brewer mixed the wrong grain, botched the fermentation, and offered sour, flat beer to his dead uncle. 2 days later, his house caught fire. Coincidence? Maybe. But no one wanted to test it. That's why today's batch had to be perfect. Double-strained, honey-sweetened, brewed under a priest's supervision. You even chanted a little during the mash stage, just in case Hathor was listening. You hope the dead guy appreciates it. You hope he's drinking right now in some golden field, clinking jars with Osiris and flirting with blue lotus maidens. You hope the beer tastes like heaven. You pour another cup. As the sun dips lower, the feast slows. People sit on low stools, bellies full, heads warm. Children curl against their mothers, half asleep, barley crumbs on their lips. You stretch out your legs and stare at the stars beginning to bloom above the temple wall. Someone plays a reed flute nearby, software mournful. You sip from your third, or maybe fourth, cup. The dead man is silent, of course, but in a strange way he's the host of this whole thing. He's the reason you're here, the reason you drank, the reason the brewery stayed up 2 nights prepping that honey-drenched, spiced batch reserved only for funerals and festivals. You think, oddly, that you kind of like him. Historically, some tombs even listed drink menus. Carvings recorded the quantity and type of beer left for the deceased. Strong beer, sweet beer, festival beer. Some were flavoured with herbs like coriander, or soaked with raisins, or brewed for extra thickness to survive long storage. Beer was even used as a payment to workers building the tombs. And what was offered in the tombs? Often the same kind of beer that workers drank, but purified, prayed over, and poured by sacred hands. In essence, beer was a bridge between the living and the dead, between the now and the forever. Eventually the priest gives the final prayer. The dancers bow, the drums fade. The tomb is sealed, heavy stone grinding into place. You feel a weight settle in your chest. Not grief exactly, more like awe, and a little buzz. You stand. The feast is over. The man is gone, but the beer lingers. So does the warmth. You walk away with sticky hands, a half-full belly, and the knowledge that somewhere, deep in the earth, a spirit is raising a clay mug with your name on it. And hopefully, the beer is still good. You've been warned about wine your whole life. It's the drink of nobles, of priests, of scribes with too many rings and not enough humility. It's what Pharaoh sips from golden goblets at banquets, where the bread is shaped like birds and the dancers don't wear much. You, on the other hand, are a barley drinker, a mash scooper, a commoner. You've never even seen wine until today. Today you are standing in the Nile Delta surrounded by rows of twisted vines. And today, for reasons the gods themselves may frown upon, you're going to taste the forbidden fruit. To be clear, you don't work in the vineyard. You work next to the vineyard, hauling baskets, fixing irrigation trenches, and occasionally rescuing half-drowned geese from the canals. But this week, you're lucky. A vineyard porter broke his ankle falling off a grape press, and the overseer needed someone with a strong back and a weak will. That's you. You're handed a basket lined with linen and told to pick only the plumpest grapes, the ones already starting to wrinkle and ferment in the heat. The air is heavy with sweetness and the buzz of tiny flies. Bees orbit your elbows. Your hands are purple within an hour. You're not paid in wine, but today you will not be going home thirsty. Historically, wine in ancient Egypt was a precious commodity. Early on, it had to be imported from Canaan and the Levant. Only later, during the New Kingdom, did the Egyptians begin cultivating grapes in their own fertile northern delta. Vineyards were often state-owned or temple-run, tightly regulated and labour-intensive. Wine wasn't for the workers, it was for ceremonies, for offerings, for Pharaoh, and that exclusivity made it powerful. In tomb inscriptions, wine appears alongside incense, music and sexual bliss, part of the good life, both on earth and in the afterlife. It symbolised status, abundance, and dangerous pleasure. Some even believed it could blur the line between the mortal world and the divine. In the wine press room, you're told to watch, not stomp. The main press is carved from limestone, a trough where men tread grapes barefoot while singing hymns to Hathor. The juice runs down channels into terracotta vats lined with resin and beeswax. You can smell the fermentation beginning already, sour, heady, oddly floral. Your stomach growls. You haven't eaten since dawn. The bread ran out, the lentils were forgotten, and someone stole your fig ration. Your lips are dry. Your hands itch with sticky grape residue. And just beyond the storage chamber is a cracked amphora labelled discard. A sign from the gods. You sneak inside. The air is cool and damp. Clay jars tower around you like sentinels, each sealed with mud and stamped with ink. Most are destined for temples or Pharaoh's house. You can tell by the labels. Sweet wine, year 19 of Ramses, East Vineyard, very good. That last part sounds like a lie, but one jar is cracked, leaking, forgotten. You kneel beside it, cup your hand, and dip. The taste hits instantly, sharp, vinegary, with undertones of raisins and something smoky. It coats your tongue, then floods your cheeks with warmth. For a moment, you forget your own name. Then you cough so hard you pull a muscle. Still, worth it. Factually, Egyptian wine was far from today's Merlot. It was thick, murky, sometimes spiced with herbs, sometimes mixed with seawater or date syrup. It spoiled easily, so preservation techniques range from beeswax sealed lids to heavy infusions of resin, making some vintages taste like pine trees soaked in vinegar. Despite that, it was considered sacred. Offerings of wine were made to gods like Osiris, who symbolized rebirth and fertility. Some temples required priests to drink before ceremonies, believing wine brought them closer to the divine. Others warned that too much would invite madness. Naturally, pharaohs ignored the warnings. That night you feel different. You're back in your hut, belly full of stolen wine and regret, lying under the open sky. Your head pulses with heat. Your limbs are jelly. You're not quite drunk. More like possessed. You swear you saw ibis blink at you sideways. Your mouth tastes like resin and figs. Your dreams are full of gold and laughter and a woman shaped like the Nile. Maybe it's the fever. Or maybe it's the wine. Archaeologists have found wine labels etched into jars buried in royal tombs, some still sealed after 3,000 years. These inscriptions list not only the vineyard and the year, but also poetic names like Wine of the House of Rejoicing or Very Excellent Wine Smooth on the Tongue. Royal vintners kept meticulous records. Wine was tracked, stored in amphorae, and distributed like treasure. In the tomb of Tutankhamun, over 26 jars of wine were found, red, white, and even rosé. You? You drank the discard vintage. Still counts. By morning your head feels like it was stepped on by a sacred bull. Your mouth is a desert. You swear your liver is whispering angry things to your kidneys. But as you return to the vineyard for your second shift, the overseer gives you a look, half suspicion, half respect. He knows. You nod. You don't speak. There are no words for what fermented grapes have done to your insides. He tosses you a water jug. Next time, he says, ask first. He's joking, you think. Probably. You press your feet into the vineyard soil, sun rising over the delta. In the distance, a barge of sealed wine jars floats toward the palace. You'll never taste that vintage. But last night, that was yours, and the gods were watching. You've barely recovered from your secret sip of forbidden wine when the priest calls for you. Again. This time it's not to haul amphorae or sweep barley husks off the brewery floor. No, this time you're being summoned to prepare offerings for them, the gods who drink, and drink, and drink. You've heard the stories, of course. Everyone has. The ones about the day Hathor got blackout drunk and saved humanity by accident. Or the time Thoth tried to outdrink Set and forgot what century it was. And that one story they whisper after festivals. The one where Heka, god of magic, drank something so potent it made the Nile run backwards. You always thought they were exaggerations. But now, standing before the temple altar, arms full of wine jugs and honey cakes, you're beginning to suspect they were being modest. The ceremony is called the ritual of joyful intoxication, which, to be clear, is a polite term for what amounts to a god-sanctioned bender. The priests light incense, the musicians begin to play, the dancers emerge in diaphanous linen, faces painted, movements slow and serpentine. You lay out the offerings, trying not to stare, and then comes the beer, then the wine, then more beer. By the second chorus, everyone is swaying. By the third, you're pouring a honey-scented beer directly into a stone basin carved with Hathor's face, hoping she's in a good mood. Historically speaking, the festival of Hathor, also known as the Festival of Drunkenness, was a real and absolutely wild annual event held during the height of the Egyptian calendar. Why? To commemorate the time Hathor was about to destroy all of humanity, until Ra tricked her by pouring out red beer that looked like blood. She drank it. A lot of it. She got wasted, passed out, and forgot she was angry. And thus humanity was saved. So every year the people of Egypt got drunk to celebrate not being murdered by a goddess on a bender. In other words, hangover equals holy. Back in the temple you can barely stand. Your arms ache from pouring libations. Your nose is raw from the incense. You're light-headed from proximity to both divine presence and strong wine. The priest beside you mumbles a hymn through hiccups. You try to focus. The statue of Hathor stares down at you, eyes painted wide, lips curled in that mysterious smirk. You wonder if she remembers that night, the night she was tricked into mercy by alcohol. The story says she woke up confused, dazed and smiling. You know the feeling. Let's talk about divine hangovers. In Egyptian belief, gods were not distant, sober observers. They were passionate, emotional, and yes, occasionally wasted. Ritual drunkenness wasn't just allowed, it was encouraged during certain festivals, especially those tied to fertility, rebirth, and transformation. Hathor wasn't just the goddess of love and beauty, she was also the goddess of drunkenness, joy, dance, and music. When people got tipsy at her festivals, it wasn't for fun, it was an offering, a reenactment, a re-enchantment. Heka, god of magic, was said to be the force behind all transformations, including the altered states brought on by drink. He wasn't drunk himself, but he governed the thresholds, between sober and wild, between this world and the next. And then there was Bes, the short, hairy, lion-faced god of music, laughter, and unexplainable nudity. Let's just say, Bes liked a good party. You remember your first festival of Hathor? You were 10. Your aunt gave you half a cup of honey beer and said, "Just sip." You didn't. You woke up in a basket next to a goat that didn't belong to anyone. You couldn't look at dates for a week. But the joy, the permission to lose control, it was intoxicating. In a world ruled by floods, taxes, and crocodiles, the chance to dissolve into music and fermented haze, even for one night, felt like touching the divine. Back in the present, a priest stumbles and knocks over a wine jug. No one reacts, not even the gods. You take a breath and begin chanting the prayer of offering. It's melodic, repetitive, half meaningful. You're not sure the gods care about the words. They care about the rhythm, the buzz, the ecstasy, and maybe the smell of that honey cake. You steal a bite. No one sees. Archaeologists have discovered entire temples dedicated to this cycle of chaos and renewal. At Dendera, inscriptions describe the rituals in detail. People waking before dawn, drinking until they passed out, and waking again to the sound of drums. This awakening drunk was seen as a rebirth, a simulation of the myth, dying in divine ecstasy and being reborn as joyous children of the gods. Imagine if your hangover was considered holy. That's Egyptian theology in a nutshell. By nightfall you're lying in the courtyard, head on a stone pillow, looking up at the stars. Someone nearby is still singing. Someone else is vomiting into a sacred bush. You close your eyes. You've served Hathor well. You've drunk in the name of joy. You've honoured the gods with your dizziness. Tomorrow the sun will rise. You'll clean the floor. You'll curse your aching spine. But for now, in this warm, strange glow, you feel blessed. Possibly poisoned, but definitely blessed. You're sweating through your loincloth, caked in limestone dust, and holding a clay cup full of what looks like beige soup and smells faintly of armpit and hope. It's beer, and it's your breakfast. You're not a slave. Let's get that straight. You're a state labourer, contracted by the pharaoh himself, which is basically the ancient Egyptian version of having a terrible government job with great benefits and zero dental. You're building pyramids. And to keep you alive long enough to stack rocks that weigh more than your cousin's ox, the state gives you rations. Bread, onions, salted fish, and most importantly, beer. Litres of it. Every day. Thick, warm, and barely filtered. And right now, that beer's the only reason you're not lying face down in the sand. Fact check. Ancient Egypt was not built on sobriety. Contrary to popular myth, the pyramids weren't constructed by slaves. Most of the heavy lifting was done by skilled workers and seasonal labourers, often farmers working during the Nile flood season, when their fields were under water. To feed these thousands of labourers, the state ran massive provisioning systems, and at the heart of that system was beer. The standard daily ration, about 4 litres per person. That's not a typo. 4 litres a day. Why? Because it was calories, it was hydration, it was morale, and perhaps most importantly, it kept you from thinking too hard about hauling 2-ton blocks up a ramp in 110-degree heat. You drink the cup in one go. It's sour and warm with chunks that could be grain or frog. Your lips pucker. Your stomach shudders. Your body? Your body says thank you. The brew isn't just fermented barley, it's life insurance. It's vitamin delivery. It's socially accepted sedation. You reach for a second cup before someone else steals it. Nearby, a supervisor yells something about rope tension and stone alignment. You pretend not to hear. It's too early. Your brain hasn't booted up yet. You just want your morning buzz. Historically, the beer rations varied by job. Haulers, cutters, masons and transporters all received different quantities and quality. Higher-ranking workers got better stuff. Stronger, sweeter, maybe even filtered. The lower ranks drank what amounted to mildly alcoholic porridge. But hey, it still did the trick. And yes, they worked buzzed. Not blind drunk, not sloshed. Just that soft, hazy state of mind where everything hurts a little less and the sand doesn't feel like needles. You know the feeling. Midday. The sun is baking your brain. You've moved stone blocks, shouted at donkeys, accidentally stepped on someone's lunch and possibly angered a priest by using a sacred carving as a makeshift seat. You're dehydrated, dizzy and glowing red like a cooked ibis. Time for more beer. You trudge to the ration station, a mud brick building that smells like yeast and old sandals. A woman hands you your midday portion, another 1.5 litres, sloshing in a clay jug. You raise it to your cracked lips and drink greedily. Some of it goes up your nose. No one notices. You don't even care that it tastes like someone strained it through their foot. Archaeological digs at pyramid worker villages, like the one at Giza known as Hayt el Gorab, have uncovered beer jars, bakery ovens, and accounting texts showing just how seriously the Egyptians took this system. Beer was brewed on an industrial scale. Giant vats, fermentation pits, breweries big enough to supply armies, and in a way they did. These weren't your average backyard home brews. These were high-efficiency, calorie-packed fuel stations, churning out grog for thousands. The slogan might as well have been, "Build the king's tomb, get drunk, die tired." Evening. You're sprawled in the shade of a half-built storage wall watching the sky shift from gold to ash. Your body's done. Your arms feel like rope. Your hands are blistered. Your lungs are full of stone dust. But in your lap there's one more jug. The last ration of the day. You swirl it gently. Little bits of barley swirl back. You sniff. Still smells like mild regret and wet wheat. You drink it anyway. And for a moment, just a brief, blinking moment, you don't feel like a poor, overworked labourer. You feel like a god. A sweaty, gassy, mildly inebriated god. Fun fact, some ancient texts even describe beer as liquid bread. It was brewed from barley, often half-baked into loaves first, then soaked, mashed, fermented, and strained. The result was murky, nutritious, and shockingly effective at both feeding and numbing you. It was also sometimes used in religious offerings, medicine, and even diplomacy. In short, beer wasn't a luxury. It was a building material. You don't lay bricks without mortar. You don't build pyramids without buzz. Later that night, as the stars come out, you gather with your crew by the cooking fire. Someone starts a song, something about a beautiful goat and a jar that never empties. You laugh until your ribs hurt. The beer is gone, your belly is full of lentils and carbs, your eyelids droop. You feel the weight of a kingdom's history pressing into your spine. You think about how one day people will stare up at these stones and whisper about aliens. Let them. You'll know the truth. These monuments were built with bare hands, burned skin, and a bottomless jug of barley brew. You're standing in front of an altar. There's a clay bowl in your hands, still warm from your breath, filled with what the priest insists is holy beer. You sniff it. It smells like damp bread, old garlic, and a hint of regret. You're not here to drink it. You're here to give it away, to the gods, and possibly to the dead. The ritual begins before sunrise. You're part of the temple's provisioning crew, not a priest, not a scribe, not even an acolyte. You're the guy who hauls the offerings up the stairs, lays them out in perfectly straight lines, and backs away before you get smitten by divine impatience. Today's drink menu: 7 bowls of barley beer, 3 amphorae of red wine, 1 jar of palm sap ferment, don't ask, and a suspicious-looking fig mash labelled for Osiris only. You've been told the gods don't care about flavour. They care about intention. You still wouldn't serve this to a camel. Historically, drink offerings were a cornerstone of Egyptian religious life. Every major temple had a complex daily ritual called the offering liturgy, where food, incense, and alcohol were presented to the gods. The offerings were symbolic, sure, but they were also very real. Priests recited spells to transform the food and drink, making them fit for divine consumption. But here's the kicker. The gods didn't actually consume anything, which meant someone had to drink it afterward. You place the first bowl of beer at Hathor's feet. Not her real feet, just the feet of her statue, carved in perfect polished limestone and painted with eyes that follow you no matter where you stand. A priest chants behind you, waving incense. You suppress a sneeze. You move down the line, offering each bowl in sequence. 1 for Thoth, 1 for Anubis, 2 for Ra, he drinks early and often, 1 for Sekhmet, use the strong stuff, and a bonus chalice for Bez, just in case he shows up and demands a dance. And then there's Osiris. You never look directly at his statue, no one does. God of the dead, lord of the underworld, patron saint of please don't haunt me. His offering is special, a thick purplish wine mixed with fig, honey, and what might be powdered acacia bark. You pour it into a shallow bowl and hope he's in a good mood today. Ancient texts detail hundreds of offering combinations. Some were extravagant. Vintage wines, perfumed beers, rare herbs, imported spices. Others were more desperate. Sour beer, gritty porridge, palm mash that smelled like fermented feet. In theory, offerings were symbolic acts of devotion. In practice, the best items went to high temples. The rest, leftovers. Leftovers with a side of botulism. Temples like Karnak and Luxor maintained massive kitchens and breweries to keep up with demand. Even small shrines required daily feeding of the gods. Wine was often reserved for higher deities or elite ceremonies. Beer, that was for everyone, living and dead, especially dead. After the ritual, it's clean-up time. You and the others gather the untouched offerings and cart them back down to the redistribution chamber, a fancy name for the break room. Most of the food goes to the priests. The rest, well, you get what's left. Today, that means the dregs of Hathor's bowl. You raise it cautiously to your lips and sip. It's warm, slightly fizzy, definitely alcoholic. And there's a beetle doing the backstroke in the foam. You drink around it. Fun fact, Egyptians believed the dead needed sustenance in the afterlife. Tomb paintings and inscriptions often show beer and wine being offered to the deceased. These weren't just drawings. They were magical contracts. If you buried someone with an image of wine, they'd have an eternal supply in the next world. Even better, some people were buried with actual jars of booze. Dozens of amphorae have been found in tombs, still sealed, labelled with the vineyard, vintage year, and even reviews. Sweet wine, good quality, fit for the gods. Imagine dying and being buried with Yelp reviews. One time a tomb robber told you a story. He said he once found a mummy buried with 3 jars of wine, untouched, sealed with beeswax. He took one home, cracked it open, and drank it with roasted goose. The next morning his eyes were yellow, his tongue was black, and he couldn't remember his wife's name for 2 weeks. You don't know if it's true, but you believe it. Back in the temple, the priests are laughing. Someone mixed the sacred beer with date juice. Someone else added a few drops of black lotus extract. Technically illegal, definitely intoxicating. You're already feeling warm behind the eyes. A low-ranking priest hands you a bowl and winks. You've earned it, he says. You served the gods well. You take the bowl, sip carefully. This one tastes different. Better. You wonder if it was meant for Osiris. You don't ask. As night falls, you sit by the brazier outside the temple kitchen, cradling the last of your ration. The gods have been fed. The dead have been honoured. Your belly is full, your head is light, and your feet are still attached. Always a win in ancient Egypt. You watch the stars blink into place above the obelisks. You think about how much of life and death is wrapped in ritual. How the gods were always thirsty, and how, for a few brief moments each day, the poorest worker could drink from the same jug as a god. Even if it tasted like fermented oatmeal, the tomb smells like resin, dust and stale beer. Not just a hint. A full-bodied wall of ancient funk that slaps you in the face as soon as you break the seal. The torch in your hand flickers, making the painted walls dance with golden reflections. Lotus flowers, musicians, gods with animal heads, all watching you step into eternity's pantry. You're not a thief, at least not today. You're here to help prepare a burial, a nobleman newly dead, newly embalmed, and about to embark on the most important drinking journey of his life. The one that never ends. You've never seen this much alcohol in one room. Lined up along the stone floor are over 40 sealed jars, each labelled with black hieratic ink. Vintage years, vineyard locations, short notes like "very sweet" for the West. Some even bear the names of the vintners, men whose job it was to ensure Pharaoh and his friends didn't spend the afterlife sipping vinegar. Each jar is nestled carefully in straw and linen, treated like treasure, more important than gold, more essential than perfume. Because once that tomb is sealed, there's no bar service in the duat, the Egyptian underworld. You kneel beside one amphora. The wax seal is cracked. The scent drifting up is thick and musty, like fermented figs soaked in river water. You resist the urge to dip a finger in. It's not yours, it's his, and he's watching, sort of. The mummy lies on a bier just a few feet away, swaddled in linen, face painted with gold leaf. You helped wrap him yesterday. You've seen what's inside. What you didn't see was the small ceramic cup tucked beneath his right hand. It's there now. The cup isn't symbolic. It's not a metaphor. It's his travel mug, the first sip of eternity. Burial customs in ancient Egypt were lavish, especially for the wealthy and well-connected. The body wasn't just preserved, it was equipped. Food, furniture, weapons, jewellery, and yes, alcohol were all packed in for the long trip to the afterlife. Archaeologists have uncovered tombs with dozens of amphorae stored beside the sarcophagus. Some still contain wine residue, complete with grape seeds, pollen grains, and remnants of ancient herbs, all carefully analysed, confirming that the ancient Egyptians truly intended to drink forever. One jar discovered in the tomb of King Tutankhamun was labelled "Wine of the House of Aten, Year 4", essentially a personalised vintage bottle from the boy king's royal cellar. Even the mummification process itself had a drinking component. As part of the embalming ritual, resin-soaked wine was poured over the body, purifying it, preserving it, and possibly justifying the smell to the living. The tomb you're in now, it reeks of it. But there's more than wine here. The other corner of the chamber holds beer jars, large, squat ones with wide mouths. These weren't made for storage. They were made for function. You can still see the barley residue crusted inside. This nobleman was clearly hedging his bets. Wine for the gods, beer for the journey, possibly mead for when he gets bored and starts a band with Osiris. You pause to admire the wall paintings. They tell the story of his life, boating on the Nile, receiving tribute, getting massaged by 6 servants at once, while sipping something from a golden goblet. Every figure is frozen mid-toast, every cup is brimming. The afterlife, it seems, is one endless open bar. Your job is nearly done. You place the last jug near his feet, not too close. The embalmers say spirits travel through the souls. They don't like tripping over things. You double-check the seals, wipe your hands on your kilt and step back. The priest chants a final prayer. A bowl of beer is poured onto the ground as a libation, a toast to the next world. The scent rises, familiar and comforting. You swear the mummy's face looks more relaxed now. Maybe it's the light, maybe it's the fumes. You wonder what it would be like to drink in the duat. Not just symbolically, really. To walk among reeds and stars, sipping from eternal cups, surrounded by the dead who never run out of conversation or alcohol. No taxes, no bosses, no sand in your boots. Just you, a goblet, and time that never ends. Of course, the myths don't paint it that way. The journey to the afterlife was long, perilous, full of demons, riddles, crocodile-headed gods, and a final judgment involving your heart being weighed against a feather. But if you made it through, if your heart was light and your liver unjudged, then you'd be welcomed into the field of reeds, an afterlife so peaceful even the beer never went flat. The tomb is sealed by sunset. You help roll the stone slab across the entry, then smear the mud plaster over the joints. It will harden by morning. The nobleman, and his drink supply, are now permanently offline. You lean back and sigh. It's been a long day. You wipe your hands, glance at the lingering sun, and reach into your own bag. One small clay flask. A personal ration. Weak beer, maybe a bit sour, but earned. You sit in the sand, raise the cup toward the sealed tomb and say a few words that aren't in any ritual book. Cheers, old man, save me a seat. Then you drink. And for a moment you swear the wind smells like raisins. You're kneeling in a garden beside the sacred pool, pretending to wash your hands. It's early morning, and the priests are chanting somewhere inside the temple walls. Incense smoke curls above the limestone. Birds call out over the papyrus stalks. Everything smells like damp reeds and lotus. You lean closer to the water. There it is, floating like a secret. A single, perfect blue lotus flower. You pluck it gently, tuck it into your sash, and walk calmly away. You try not to smile, because tonight you're going to get high, divinely high. In the land of the pharaohs, not everything sacred was serious. The blue lotus flower, Nymphea caerulea, held a revered place in Egyptian art, religion, and medicine. But what they didn't carve into the stone was just how often it doubled as a euphoric, a psychoactive bloom served in wine, chewed fresh, or soaked into oils until your thoughts turned syrupy and strange. It wasn't a drug in the modern sense, it was a gateway, a portal, a sacred tool, and sometimes just something fun to sip at a party. That night the courtyard is lit by fire. You're not in a public square or a temple feast. This is smaller, private, a gathering of friends and initiates. There's music, hand drums, flutes, soft chants layered under laughter. Wine is flowing, spiced, red, and thick with honey. But the real centre of attention is the large stone bowl set in the middle of the gathering, brimming with wine and crushed blue lotus petals. The smell is unmistakable, sweet, floral, with a whisper of something deeper, earthy, wild. You've never tried it before. You take a sip. The first taste is strange, not unpleasant, just different, like drinking memories, like forgetting what silence sounds like. Modern analysis of blue lotus reveals the presence of aporphine and nuciferine, two alkaloid compounds believed to induce mild euphoria, relaxation, and dreamlike states. It's not LSD, it's not opium, but it does change your headspace, slowly, subtly. Egyptians didn't talk about getting high. They spoke of visions, of divine communion, of loosening the boundaries between body and spirit. But let's be honest, they also used it to spice up the party. Lotus-infused wine became a popular drink at banquets and celebrations, especially among the elite. Tomb paintings show noblemen and women reclining on cushions, cups in hand, lotus blooms tucked behind their ears, with that unmistakable look of people whose thoughts are floating somewhere above their heads. Back in the courtyard, time is bending. You feel warm, fuzzy. The world hums around the edges. Someone offers you a fig. You swear it tastes like music. The stars above are dancing. Or maybe it's just your eyes. You try to sit up straight, but your spine has other plans. You sink back into your linen cushions and grin like a crocodile on festival day. Someone is singing. You think it's your voice. This wasn't forbidden. It wasn't taboo. In fact, the lotus was sacred to Hathor, the goddess of music, intoxication, and joy. The very act of loosening one's mind was seen as a form of reverence, provided it didn't tip too far into madness. Certain ceremonies, particularly those dedicated to fertility, rebirth, and the mysteries of the afterlife, were known to incorporate psychoactive substances. The boundaries between celebration and sacred ritual were fluid, like the Nile itself. You weren't getting high. You were getting closer to the divine. Your head is full of rivers now. You see the Nile, but from above, winding, shimmering, infinite. You see temples glowing under starlight, priests with heads like falcons, words spilling from mouths that don't move. You see your own body, small and soft and laughing, holding a cup that refills itself each time you blink. You close your eyes, You open them again. Someone's drawing a scarab in the dust beside you. You think they're speaking to you, but they sound like they're underwater. You don't mind. There were other plants too. Mandrake, henbane, hashish, and fermented date palm extracts all made appearances in Egypt's pharmacological toolkit. Some were used medicinally, for pain, sleep, digestion. Others were used sparingly, in rituals or ceremonies that pushed the limits of ordinary experience. But lotus was everywhere. It wasn't just a trip, it was a symbol. The lotus closes at night and opens again with the sun, rebirth, resurrection, consciousness itself. So when you drank it, you weren't just relaxing, you were dissolving into myth. You wake up sometime near dawn. You're still on the cushions. The courtyard is quiet now. Embers glowing in their trays, wine jugs emptied, petals scattered like confetti for gods. Your head is thick but not aching. Your mouth tastes like figs and prophecy. You sit up. The lotus you tucked into your sash is gone. Maybe you left it in the cup. Maybe it left you. As you walk back toward the temple, sand crunching beneath your sandals, you try to hold on to the feeling, the warmth, the softness, the sense that for a moment your soul was bigger than your skin. You pass a statue of Hathor along the way. Her eyes are amused, her mouth is carved mid-laugh. You nod in quiet gratitude, and the wind smells faintly of flowers. You're standing at the edge of a brewing pit staring down into what should be beer. But it looks wrong. Not just a little off. Not, oh, maybe it needs another day wrong, but cursed from birth wrong. The surface bubbles thick and dark like something is struggling to breathe underneath. It smells of wet leather, spoiled onions, and the kind of sickness that clings to your nostrils. Your stomach lurches. You know this batch is dead. And in ancient Egypt, a dead batch could mean far more than just wasted grain. It could mean wrath, disease, maybe even divine punishment. And you're the one who brewed it. It started yesterday, the heat rising early, the barley sweating in its soaking jars, the yeast struggling to bubble properly in the sticky air. You'd followed the usual process. Mash the grain, let it ferment in ceramic vats, add dates for sugar, let the goddess of fermentation do the rest. But something went wrong. You felt it in your bones before you saw it with your eyes. Now standing here, you're convinced this beer has turned, and it's not just spoiled, it's dangerous. Ancient Egyptian brewing was a delicate process. The beer wasn't filtered, pasteurized, or bottled. It was made by fermenting partially baked loaves of barley bread with warm water and date sugar, often mixed by hand in open-air pits. And the line between deliciously intoxicating and toxic sludge was alarmingly thin. Without modern hygiene or temperature control, a brew could turn bad in a matter of hours, especially if mould took hold or the yeast was unbalanced. Bad beer wasn't just disgusting, it was feared. Because in a world where fermentation was guided by the gods, a failed batch meant the gods were displeased. And if the gods were displeased, someone had to answer for it. You dip a ladle into the vat, trying not to gag, and hold the thick liquid up to the light. It's murky red, not like wine, more like rust, or worse. One of the young brewers peers over your shoulder. "Looks like blood," he says quietly. You shoot him a glare. "Don't say that. Not here." Too late. The word has been spoken aloud, and once spoken it cannot be unsaid. Within an hour the news has spread through the village. Someone saw the brew, someone smelled it, someone repeated the word blood. Now mothers are keeping their children inside. The priest from the temple of Sobek has arrived with a bowl of ashes and a nervous chant. And someone, no one sure who, has painted the threshold of your workshop with a smear of red clay. They think you've offended the gods. They think this is an omen. You think you're going to lose your job. Historical records and mythological texts reveal a deep spiritual connection between brewing and divinity. Beer was considered a gift from the gods, particularly Tenenet, goddess of childbirth and beer, and Hathor, the intoxicated mother of joy and chaos. But this closeness came with a risk. To brew was to play with powers that straddled life and death. One myth tells of the time Sekhmet, goddess of vengeance, nearly destroyed humanity in a blood-soaked rage. The god stopped her by tricking her into drinking a lake of beer dyed red. It worked. She passed out, spared mankind, and woke up with the worst hangover in divine history. Since then, red-coloured beer that looked like blood, became a ceremonial tool used in festivals and rituals to symbolically pacify dangerous forces. But when the colour showed up by accident, that was something else entirely. You're told to drain the vat. No one will touch it, so you do it yourself, tipping the clay container onto its side and letting the liquid ooze out like a wounded animal. It stains the sand. A dog comes sniffing, then backs away, whining. Even the flies seem hesitant. As you scrub the pit clean, a chill settles over you, not from the wind, but from memory. You remember the last time a batch went wrong. Old Menna, 2 villages over, his beer foamed black. He blamed the grain. The villagers blamed Menna. A week later, his house was burned, his brewing bowls shattered, and Menna himself was found trying to wash his tongue in the canal. He didn't speak for a year after that. You rinse the last of the sludge away, muttering apologies to every god whose name you can think of. You offer a splash of fresh water to the sun. You grind herbs into ash and scatter them over the sand. You even kneel, knees in the mud, and whisper to the goddess Tenenet that you didn't mean any harm. Then you light a fire just to be safe. Let the flames carry the blame upward. Let the smoke distract the gods from your mistake. Later, when the sky goes pink and the village begins to murmur again with life, you sit alone near the canal, staring at your reflection in the water. You see the sweat on your brow, the purple smear under your fingernails, the crease of worry that didn't used to be there. Tomorrow you'll try again, a new batch, a new prayer. This time, you'll bake the bread longer. You'll bless the jars. You'll wait for the right winds. You'll remember that this isn't just brewing. It's balancing on a tightrope between nourishment and curse. And maybe, just maybe, the beer won't turn to blood. You're not supposed to be here. In fact, if the city guard finds you even sniffing around this alley, your kneecaps might find themselves politely introduced to the business end of a reed cane. But curiosity is a powerful drug, second only to what's brewing behind the crumbling wall ahead of you. You duck beneath a sagging cloth awning. The alley opens into a shadowed room lit by a single oil lamp, flickering weakly against a soot-stained ceiling. Clay jugs line the back wall, their mouths stuffed with palm fibre. No sign, no menu, no priestly blessings, just bad decisions and questionable barley. Welcome to Egypt's underground tavern scene. You heard about this place from a guy who sells reed mats and suspiciously strong perfume. Said it was where the real stuff flows. Said it wasn't for nobles or priests, but for people like you. Tired people, dusty people, people who've had just about enough of the Nile's nonsense for one lifetime. The tavern keeper greets you with a grunt. She's old, leathery, possibly missing a few teeth, and very clearly in charge. She points to an empty stool and then to a mug already half filled with what looks like cloudy swamp water. You sit, you drink. You immediately regret everything. Let's get one thing clear. Ancient Egypt had taverns, and they were scandalous. They weren't officially sanctioned drinking houses. They were shady backroom operations that sprang up in poor districts, alleyways, or even literal holes dug into the side of mud brick homes. Think speakeasies, but with more camel hair in the beer. Authorities tried to shut them down. Moralists warned that taverns led to gossip, adultery, laziness, and general disorder. Which, to be fair, they absolutely did, and that was the point. The drink in your hand tastes like someone fermented sadness in a bucket. It's warm, it's sour, There's something floating in it. But the effect, immediate. Your shoulders relax. Your feet stop aching. The world becomes slightly softer around the edges, like someone just padded the walls of your anxiety. Next to you, a potter leans in and whispers a story about how he once saw a hippo dance during a festival. Across the room, someone is arguing that cats are reincarnated gods, which, to be fair, is not even controversial here. Someone passes you a skewer of grilled lizard. You chew thoughtfully. It's better than the beer. The problem wasn't just the alcohol, it was who wasn't controlling it. In formal settings, beer and wine were closely regulated. Temples brewed massive quantities under divine supervision. Feasts were documented, with drink offerings made to gods and ancestors alike. Brewing was a sacred art. But these taverns, this was booze without bureaucracy, joy without permission, and that made them dangerous. You learn quickly that these places run on unspoken rules. Don't ask where the beer came from. Don't ask what's in the beer. Don't stare too long at the man with the scar and the pet mongoose. Always tip the barkeep with something useful. A coin, a charm, a chunk of dried fish. Tonight you've brought a fig cake. She eyes it suspiciously. You add a pinch of myrrh. She nods. The music starts late. A reed flute, slightly out of tune, joins a hand drum and the rhythmic clapping of hands that have definitely been inside grain bins today. Someone begins to dance. Badly, but enthusiastically. You're on your fourth cup now and the floor seems to breathe when you walk on it. Someone tells a joke about a priest, a donkey, and a very unlucky crocodile. You laugh too loud. You hiccup. You cry a little. Not because of the story, but because you're suddenly overwhelmed with how weirdly beautiful the whole thing is. Drunk logic, it's bulletproof. Archaeologists have discovered graffiti in workmen's villages, especially at Deir el-Medina, that suggests illegal drinking was a common, beloved, and completely unsupervised pastime. There were even ancient drunken disorder incidents on record. One scroll details how a mason got so intoxicated he chiselled part of his own foot. Another story claims a scribe once tried to write hieroglyphs using wine instead of ink, resulting in a sticky scroll and several annoyed colleagues. Taverns were places of release, rebellion, and rumour-mongering. They were where social hierarchies broke down, briefly, where the slave might sit beside the soldier, the scribe beside the stable boy, where nobody bowed unless they fell off the stool. You're not sure how long you've been here. Time melts inside this room. Eventually the tavern keeper taps your shoulder, gently, like a parent who's too tired to scold. You rise, slowly, and stumble out into the cool night. The stars are spinning just slightly too fast, and the road home is mostly sand and instinct. You think about what you'll tell your family. Probably, work went late. Or, I was helping at the temple. Definitely not. I drank 6 cups of barley sludge next to a flute-playing criminal and ate a lizard named Kevin. You reach your home and collapse onto your mat, still warm from the day's heat. Your breath smells like old dates. Your sandals are missing. Your brain hums like a content cat. You feel terrible. You feel wonderful. You feel human. You're not supposed to be laughing. But it's hard not to, because the High Priest of Sobek, guardian of divine order, keeper of ancient rites, wearer of intimidating eyeliner, has just tripped over a sacred ibis and landed face first in a basket of pomegranates. You're also not supposed to be tipsy, but it's hard not to be, because the 5th cup of ritual wine you just offered to the crocodile god somehow missed the altar and ended up in your stomach. The floor wobbles gently. The oil lamps flicker in a way that suggests they too have had a little too much. Welcome to the Temple of Sacred Overpouring. You weren't trying to get drunk, it just sort of happened. It started with the usual libations. Pour a little wine for the statue, pour a little more for the gods of air and water, a splash for the ancestors, a splash for the high priest, and well, someone had to make sure the wine wasn't poisoned, that someone was you, repeatedly, just to be safe. Historically, priests in ancient Egypt were supposed to live pure, regulated lives, clean-shaven, abstinent, diet-restricted and sober, especially when serving in the inner sanctum. Except, not always. There were ceremonies that required alcohol, libation rituals, harvest festivals, temple feasts dedicated to Hathor, Osiris and other deities who were, let's say, enthusiastic drinkers. And in those moments, the rules loosened, spirits flowed, the veil between worship and wine got thinner than a priest's linen tunic in August. You stagger slightly as you swing the censer, thick curls of myrrh and frankincense mixing with the very human aroma of sweat, old grapes, and regret. The junior acolytes are wide-eyed. One is trying to reassemble a dropped sacred scroll. Another is chanting slightly out of rhythm, his voice going up an octave each time he hiccups. You try to refocus, steady your hands, recite the prayer. May the gods receive this offering. Hic. Close enough. Wine was considered sacred in many rituals. Offerings to gods like Hathor, goddess of music and intoxication, often involved not just symbolic gestures but full-on temple feasts. Archaeological records show storerooms filled with wine jars, some inscribed with vintage labels like very good, sweet with figs, or for use during festivals only. Let's be honest. If a wine jug has a label that says for use during festivals only, there's a reason that label exists, and it's not because the gods were pacing themselves. Back in the temple hall, someone's dropped a sistrum, the sacred rattle, and it's now being used as a spoon to scoop olives from a funerary platter. You do not stop them, mostly because you just knocked over a table of sacred bread loaves and are pretending you meant to do it. Someone suggests a hymn. It starts well. By verse 3, it's devolved into something between a love ballad and a slurred shopping list. It's not all chaos. Between the laughter and the missteps, the priests do their jobs. The wine is poured, the chants are sung, the offerings are laid, and maybe, just maybe, the gods don't mind a little looseness around the edges. After all, Hathor herself was once so intoxicated during a festival that she fell asleep mid-offering and had to be carried home by worshippers singing lullabies. The line between reverence and revelry? In ancient Egypt, it was often drawn in wine. Eventually the ceremony winds down. The altar flickers quietly. The gods have been fed, flattered, and, hopefully, not offended. You sit on the temple steps, sipping from your 7th cup, watching the stars blink overhead like judgmental ancestors. You'll regret this tomorrow. You'll wake up with a mouth like sun-baked papyrus and a sense of holy shame. But for now, everything feels warm, sacred even, as if the gods are laughing with you. You knew this festival would be loud. You knew there'd be drums, smoke, and at least one uncle dancing shirtless by the end of it. But what you didn't expect, what no one expects, is the exact moment when a drunk linen vendor accidentally sets fire to the sacred banner of Horus and kicks off the kind of evening that makes it into cautionary hieroglyphs. And the worst part, that linen vendor is you. Let's back up. It's the Festival of Flame and Fertility, an annual blowout hosted under the full moon in honour of Sekhmet, goddess of fire, war, and the kind of wine-fueled rage that once nearly ended humanity, which naturally calls for a party. You've been preparing all week, woven garlands, cleaned your one nice tunic, even rehearsed your ceremonial shout. And because you have a reputation to maintain, you brought a jug of your very own spiced barley brew. Big mistake. The temple courtyard is a riot of sound. Hand drums thrum like distant thunder. Dancers whirl in gold-painted linen. Torches blaze from every column. The smell of roasting duck mingles with lotus perfume and sweat. You arrive late, slightly buzzed, slightly proud, and entirely unaware that you are about to become the evening's cautionary tale. Ancient Egypt loved its festivals. There were over 70 official feasts on the calendar, some lasting days, others weeks. They honoured gods, seasons, harvests, and celestial events. and they all shared two sacred ingredients: fire and alcohol. These weren't quiet affairs. There were processions, open-air feasts, fire ceremonies, river parades, and spontaneous fits of ecstatic dancing. Gods were carried through streets in gilded barges. Priests tossed incense into flames. Acrobats performed stunts that would terrify modern insurance agents. And through it all, the booze flowed. Back in the courtyard, you've reached peak confidence. You swing your personal wine jug in one hand, raise a torch with the other, and declare, loudly, that Sekhmet is your girl, and this one's for her. You lunge forward. Your torch connects with the ceremonial banner, which, you now recall, was soaked in oil to catch the fire during the final ritual. It catches early. It catches hard. There's a moment of silence. Just one beat where every priest, dancer and goat in the courtyard stares at you. And then everything happens at once and people shout. Someone trips over a drum. The high priest drops his scepter into a wine jug. A flaming scrap of linen lands on a musician's hair, who responds by diving headfirst into a vat of dates. You, meanwhile, are trying to beat the flames with your own tunic, which only spreads the fire and somehow ignites a tray of festival bread. Congratulations! You've invented the world's first flaming crouton. Fire and drunkenness didn't mix well in ancient festivals, but that didn't stop anyone from trying. In the Feast of the Valley, locals lit lamps and placed them on boats to float down the Nile, a river parade of flickering flame. In Hatha's honour, torches were carried through villages while celebrants danced and drank. Sometimes things went fine, other times entire granaries caught fire, temples had to be reconsecrated, and one papyrus even recounts a festival where a cow, fully painted in divine symbols, ran through a fire pit and vanished into a thicket never to be seen again. Back in your courtyard of chaos, the fire is finally under control. The priests are glaring, the crowd is laughing. You have one eyebrow left and exactly 0 chance of being invited next year. You offer a sheepish grin and raise your now empty jug in apology. Someone cheers. Another jug is passed. Somehow, despite everything, the party resumes. Later, sitting in the ash-streaked shadow of a pillar, you reflect on the divine lesson of the evening. Never pre-game a fire ceremony, and always check your linen for flammability. The stars above flicker. The fire crackles low. The drums are distant now, replaced by the soft hum of drunk villagers arguing about whether Sekhmet prefers figs or honey cakes. You exhale. You're alive. Barely. And somehow, that's enough. There's a very specific type of guilt that hits when you wake up in a ditch, especially when that ditch is next to the sacred Nile, and especially when your mouth tastes like you chewed on a sandal, and your only memory of last night involves shouting, "I am a hippopotamus," at a royal tax collector before belly flopping into a fish cart. You peel your face off the dirt, blink into the sun, and try to remember what year it is. Congratulations. You're part of a long and proud tradition of getting absolutely plastered in ancient Egypt and doing something stupid. Drunkenness wasn't just for festivals and temples. It was a full-time hazard, a wild card in daily life. And for some Egyptians, it was a shortcut straight to chaos. There are clay tablets detailing fights between drunken bakers. There are tomb carvings of noblemen warning their sons not to marry women who drink too much wine. There are even preserved records of officials being demoted or exiled for public intoxication during sacred rituals. In short, if someone in a linen tunic is grinning too wide and holding a clay jug, you'd best start walking the other direction. You remember now, you'd started the night at a friend's house. 1 jug of beer, 2 songs, 3 uninvited guests. Then someone challenged you to a foot race with a goose. Then someone else dared you to steal a priest's ceremonial wig. And then, darkness. According to surviving records, excessive drinking was seen as dangerous, not just to the drinker, but to society itself. The famous Instructions of Ani, a sort of ancient Egyptian moral guidebook, warned young men not to overindulge. One line reads, "Beer, it leads the heart astray, and makes your words stink in the mouth of others." Another text describes how a drunken scribe tried to ride a donkey backward through a grain market and caused 3 days of trade disruptions. He was reassigned to counting bricks on the outskirts of town, forever. You try to stand. A passing fisherman eyes you warily. Somewhere nearby, a temple bell rings. You've missed work. Again. Your boss is going to be livid. But you've got a plan. The same one everyone uses. Blame it on the gods. I was at a festival, you'll say. I was honouring Hathor. It was the date beer. It was possessed. You rehearse the excuses as you walk home, head pounding like a temple drum. Graffiti discovered at Deir el-Medina, the workers' village for royal tomb builders, shows a surprising amount of humour about drunkenness. Some scribes drew crude cartoons of their co-workers passed out beside jars. Others wrote sarcastic poems mocking people who couldn't hold their wine. One image shows a man vomiting into a chamber pot while a cat watches, unimpressed. Another features a partygoer asleep in a basket labelled the Pharaoh of Regret. You finally arrive home. Your neighbour glares at you from across the courtyard. There's a chicken pecking your sandal. You still smell like fish. You enter your dwelling, collapse on a reed mat, and try to breathe through your shame. And yet, a small part of you laughs. Because you know tonight, after the sun sets, after the Nile cools, someone will knock on your door with a jug and a terrible idea. And you? You'll probably say yes. You're dead. Which, all things considered, is not the worst part. The worst part is that your tomb smells like incense, old bread, and the faint tang of fear sweat from your embalmer. Your body is wrapped in linen so tight you can hear your ribs creak. Your face is painted gold. Your heart is missing, politely stored in a fancy jar, and your cat is probably being mummified in the next room over. But the good news? They buried you with beer. Because in ancient Egypt, entering the afterlife without alcohol was like showing up to a royal feast without your pants. Here's the thing. Death was never the end in ancient Egyptian belief. It was a layover, a waiting room, a bureaucratic nightmare of judgment, soul-weighing, gate-guarding crocodile gods, and elaborate paperwork in hieroglyphs. And to survive all that, you needed sustenance. Real stuff. Bread, onions, meat, and booze. Tombs across Egypt, from pharaohs to farmers, are absolutely stuffed with beer and wine jars. Some were full, some were decorative. Many were labelled with things like, "For the journey to the west." Very fine beer for the car, brewed for the happiness of the soul. Because yes, your car, the vital essence of you, got thirsty too. Back to you. You're technically dead, but the ceremony's just beginning. Priests chant, family members wail, some genuinely, others for show. You know how Aunt Setka is. The mortuary feast is underway, and among the offerings placed beside your sarcophagus, 16 jars of barley beer, 3 amphorae of wine from the Delta, and for good measure a few cakes shaped like ducks. Not bad. We know from archaeological finds that burial goods often included beer jugs sealed with clay and marked with brewing dates. In one tomb, the wine jars were stamped Year 30 of Ramses II, complete with vineyard location. That's how seriously they took their afterlife wine list. In fact, in the tomb of Tutankhamun, researchers found wine jars labelled for the lady of the house, possibly for a consort, or just because a good party requires variety. Even workers' graves weren't skipped. Beer jars were a common feature in the simplest burials. It didn't matter if you were royal or just really into mud brick. If you wanted to make it through the field of reeds, you brought a drink. You drift into the afterlife now, and by drift, we mean stumble. There's no chariot waiting for you, just a river, some reeds, and the unmistakable sensation of having forgotten your sandals. You pass through gates guarded by strange creatures with crocodile heads and lion paws. They ask your name. You forget it. You offer them beer. They wave you through. The Book of the Dead, Egypt's ultimate travel guide for the soul, even includes references to libations. One spell calls for a pouring out of beer for the gods and the blessed dead, and some magical papyri depict deceased souls receiving cups of wine from friendly spirits or brewing beer in the next world like nothing changed. Because apparently paradise isn't golden palaces, it's exactly like home, just with better booze and no taxes. Eventually you arrive, the field of reeds. It looks a lot like your farm, if your farm had talking animals and every crop grew instantly. You're greeted by ancestors, pets, and one surprisingly handsome neighbour you never noticed in life. You sit beneath a date palm, someone hands you a drink, you sip. It's perfect. Better than anything in the mortal world. No floaters, no sour aftertaste. Just cool, crisp beer brewed with cosmic barley and touched by sunlight. You smile. You made it. And thanks to those offerings they packed beside your corpse, you're not going thirsty anytime soon. You open your eyes. Bad idea. The sun is blinding. The air smells like donkey and onions. And something in your skull is trying to escape through your temples using a pair of stone chisels. You've woken up in your courtyard, or someone else's courtyard, wrapped in a papyrus mat and wearing one sandal. There's a clay jug next to you that might contain water. It might also contain fermented regret. Congratulations, you're experiencing a classic Egyptian hangover, and the day is just getting started. You sit up and try to piece together what happened. You remember wine, then more wine, then someone dared you to kiss the ceremonial goose at the festival of Hathor, then darkness. Now your head is pounding, your mouth feels like it's been embalmed, and your stomach is staging a quiet rebellion. You need help. You need ancient Egyptian medicine, which is unfortunate, because it's about to get weird. Let's start with lettuce. Yes, lettuce. The Egyptians believed this leafy green was a symbol of virility and a tool of digestive salvation. Ancient papyri suggest that eating lettuce, raw, warm or lightly mashed, could cleanse the body of excess wine. You stagger to the kitchen. You find a head of wilted lettuce. You eat it like a desperate goat. You immediately regret it. Next, amulets. Specifically the Eye of Horus, a magical symbol of healing and protection. According to temple healers, wearing the eye on a linen string around your neck could protect you from sickness. You tie one on, you do not feel better, but you do feel protected, from judgment if nothing else. There's also a prayer, tucked in a lesser-known section of the Ebers Papyrus, a massive medical scroll dating back to 1550 BCE, that says, "May your head not throb. May your body not tremble. May your mouth find water sweet again." It's poetic. It's comforting. You chant it 3 times. Your neighbour asks you to please keep it down. You've heard rumours of a real cure, a tonic made by temple physicians involving ground myrrh, fig juice, and boiled river reeds. You try to find someone who can make it. The local apothecary is out of myrrh. He offers you fermented cow's milk instead. You consider dying. Historical note, the Ebers Papyrus does indeed include hangover treatments, though they weren't called that. Remedies for excess inebriation included cooling balms made of honey and thyme, as well as stomach poultices made from crushed herbs and lizard fat. Yes, lizard fat. You don't even know where to begin sourcing that. You chew on a date instead. It's the only part of your life that still makes sense. You try to nap. You're interrupted by temple drums. Apparently there's another festival today. You're not sure if you can survive it. Your stomach begs you to stay home. Your curiosity and mild addiction to fig wine says otherwise. You compromise, drink slowly, chew your lettuce, and keep at least 1 foot in a bucket of cool water. That last part isn't medicine. It just feels right. Later that day, as you walk past the scribe's quarters, you overhear a man telling his friend, "I once drank so much I woke up convinced I was a crocodile priest." The other man replies, deadpan, "You are a crocodile priest." They both burst into laughter. You don't join in. You're too busy holding your amulet in one hand, clutching your stomach with the other, and wondering why anyone thought boiled reeds were a good idea. By sundown, the headache fades. You eat a simple stew, lie on your mat and stare at the ceiling. You've survived. Barely. You promise yourself you'll drink less next time. And by less, you mean probably. And by probably, you mean only if it's not a full moon and the beer's bad. Which it never is. You were supposed to be transcribing tax records. A simple assignment. List grain counts, cattle receipts, and wine rations from the previous lunar cycle. But somewhere between 18 jars of red from Delta District and 4 goats, returned with attitude, your writing went sideways. Literally. The papyrus is smeared. The ink smells like fermented dates, and instead of drawing the sign for harvest, you've accidentally scribbled hippopotamus wearing a crown. You stare at your work. You're either a visionary or you're very, very drunk. Let's talk about scribes. In ancient Egypt, scribes were rock stars. Literate, respected, sometimes feared, always essential. They managed everything from temple finances to legal proceedings, military inventories to love poetry. If it was written, a scribe wrote it. But beneath the reverent job title and crisp ink brush strokes was a human being, stressed, underpaid, and increasingly fond of the temple brewery. And occasionally, they cracked. Evidence of scribal drinking doesn't show up in solemn carvings, but it does show up in graffiti. Take Deir el Medina, the workers' village responsible for building the royal tombs. In the cliffside shelters and limestone walls nearby, archaeologists found dozens of casual doodles, including a baboon dancing with a wine jug, a cat playing a harp labelled Supervisor of Wine, a hieratic note reading, "May I never again drink the beer of Ippur, for my stomach has turned against the gods." In short, the scribes got rowdy. Back to you. You're sitting in a record room, a hot mosquito-filled clay chamber surrounded by jars of ink, reed pens and scrolls that smell like old onions and even older curses. Your supervisor is snoring in the corner. The temple priest has brought you a jug of ceremonial beer, which you strongly suspect is just the leftover dregs from the festival of Bastet. You drank it anyway, because deadlines are stressful, and nothing screams administrative enlightenment like barley wine aged in amphorae with a slight note of rat. You return to work. The problem is, hieroglyphs don't like to stay still when you've had a few. You try to draw the symbol for grain. Instead, you draw a loaf with legs. You write 27 jars, then immediately write 27 jars again. Then, to be safe, write 27 jars a third time and underline it. With a bird. You take a break. You doodle a donkey wearing sunglasses. You take another sip. The papyrus is now a brilliant blend of genius and gibberish. Historically, scribes were trained from childhood, often in temple schools called houses of life. They learned math, grammar, accounting, and how to copy complex spells from sacred texts. But their job was stressful. Long hours, strict formatting, and high stakes. One wrong word could get a tax collector reassigned to goat-counting duty in Nubia. So yes, they drank. Not all the time, not during major rituals, but after hours. Oh yes. One ostracon, pottery shard used for writing practice, contains a scribe's personal prayer. Grant me wine enough to finish this list and sleep enough to forget it. Same, friend. Same. By evening your scroll is finished. Technically, it includes a complete tax log, a limerick about a cat who steals cheese, a crude sketch of your supervisor's nose, and the phrase "all is dust," written 5 times in increasing panic. You consider rewriting it. You do not. You roll it up, mark it with the official seal, which you accidentally drop in ink, and deliver it with a bow and a hiccup. No one notices. They're all drunk too. You return to your dwelling and collapse onto your mat. Tomorrow you'll regret everything, but tonight you're a literary legend, a papyrus Picasso, the Michelangelo of mildly inebriated math logs. And somewhere deep in the temple archives, your scroll will rest for 3,000 years. until an archaeologist reads it and wonders why someone wrote taxed onions, duck in the margins. You wake up wet. And not the kind of wet that suggests a pleasant dip in the Nile followed by a refreshing towel off and a fig snack. Number this is I may have almost died wet. Your linen kilt is soaked, there's river mud in your ear, and your left sandal is missing, last seen sailing downstream, presumably to become the humble footwear of an unsuspecting fish. Also, you're fairly certain you just heard a crocodile laugh. Let's rewind. Last night had been festive. A moonlit gathering on the riverbank. Jugs of honey wine passed from hand to hand. Sweet date cakes, flute music, a decent breeze, and for reasons no one can now explain, a drinking contest involving a carved ibex horn and a very slippery wooden plank, which you lost, spectacularly. The Nile was not just a river, it was life itself. It brought water, trade, silt for farming, fish, and occasionally an uninvited hippo. But it also held spiritual power. The Nile had a soul, a pulse, a divine rhythm. It was also full of predators. Crocodiles, sacred and feared, were both worshipped and avoided. The god Sobek, depicted with a crocodile head, was believed to embody strength, fertility, and raw, unfiltered chaos. So when someone fell into the Nile during a party, it wasn't just a splash, it was a potential divine encounter. Back to you. You had just taken your 5th gulp from the ibex horn. The villagers were cheering. Someone was playing a harp in a minor key. Someone else was already throwing up behind a palm tree. And then the plank snapped. Your fall was impressive. You remember the stars spinning, the cold rush, the slap of muddy water, and the distinct feeling that something large brushed your leg, followed by the decision to never drink again, which lasted about 4 minutes. Ancient Egyptian texts actually reference river safety. One wisdom text reads, "Do not drink near the crocodile's mouth, for Sobek is swift and likes the taste of the careless." Another priestly scroll advises that festivities must not cross the banks after dusk, which is historian speak for don't party near predators. But did people listen? Of course not, because nothing pairs with barley beer like the thrill of ancient river roulette. You haul yourself out of the mud with the grace of a soggy turnip. Your friends are still singing. Someone throws you a jug yelling, "Sobek spared you, drink in his honour." You drink, again, because you are a master of decisions. Later that night, the high priest will claim he saw Sobek's eyes glowing from the reeds, and that your fall was a spiritual test. You'll claim the priest was already 5 cups deep and mistook a frog for divine wrath. Neither of you will be entirely wrong. Crocodile-human interactions were recorded in temple offerings. Fishermen would sometimes offer fish and beer to Sobek in hopes of safe passage. In the Fayum region, entire temples were built in Sobek's honour, where real crocodiles were mummified and placed in elaborately painted tombs. Some were given names, some were even buried with their own miniature beer jars. Yes, really, you limp home, covered in algae, spiritually confused, emotionally soggy, but alive, which after a river plunge in ancient Egypt is more than most could say. You light a small oil lamp, you thank Sobek loudly and slurringly for not eating your face. Then you pass out with one leg still dangling over your front step. Your dreams are full of harp-playing crocodiles and ibex horns that refill themselves. You snore like the Nile current. And somewhere in the darkness the river keeps flowing, and watching. The first thing you notice is the smoke, not the spiritual kind. No fragrant myrrh wafting through temple halls or incense spiralling in hypnotic curls. No. This is the practical kind. Burnt bread crusts, singed feathers, and one sandal that met its end too close to a ceremonial torch. The second thing you notice is your headache. Your skull is hosting a small but passionate drum circle. You open one eye. You're in the temple courtyard, surrounded by offerings, half naked, fully confused. A chicken is roosting on your stomach. Congratulations. You have survived the festival of Hathor. Barely. The feast has ended. The wine jars are drained. The drums are silent. The gods have presumably gone back to whatever divine plane they inhabit, possibly also nursing hangovers. And now comes the reckoning. The ground is a battlefield of clay shards, wilted lotus flowers, broken amulets, and one suspicious-looking honey cake with bite marks and a single human hair baked inside. You rise slowly, like a cursed statue. Your joints creak, your knees wobble. The chicken flaps away in a flurry of judgment. Across the courtyard, a priest is sweeping up garlands with the dignity of a man who definitely saw too much last night. A scribe is quietly vomiting behind a column. A drunk musician is asleep in a fountain. This is what the end of joy looks like. Historically, the aftermath of ancient Egyptian festivals was not all divine bliss and poetic reflection. Accounts, both written and etched in temple walls, show that large celebrations often resulted in property damage, especially torches plus palm fronds equals very flammable. Interpersonal disputes, fueled by too much fig wine and unresolved goat envy, and widespread nausea. One text from Deir el-Medina notes that after a particularly rowdy feast, 4 men could not work for 3 days, for their stomachs were cursed and their eyes refused light. A polite way of saying they were massively hungover and deeply, deeply sorry. You shuffle over to a basin, splash your face with cold water, and attempt to remember your name. You fail. But you do remember dancing with a shrine statue, and proposing marriage to a priestess's donkey, and crying when someone dropped a jar of raisins. So, you're probably due for some apologies. Someone hands you a broom, a silent gesture, a sacred tradition. You accept, and thus begins the great clean-up. Every festival had its purge, the ritual post-party restoration. Servants, acolytes, drunk uncles, all were summoned to remove the evidence. Beer jugs were scraped and stacked. Offerings were cleared, some eaten, some buried, some definitely regifted. Soot-stained walls were washed. Floors were scrubbed with water mixed with desert sand. Nature's gritty cleanser. In one document from Karnak, temple officials described the morning after a festival as a return to balance, order, and the sobering sound of sandals squeaking on wet stone. Poetic and deeply accurate. You find your missing kilt wrapped around a cat statue. You find your other sandal inside a clay pot labelled Offerings for the Afterlife. You retrieve both with minimal shame. The temple bell rings, not in celebration but in acknowledgement. The feast is over, the gods have been pleased, and now it is time to return to normal life. Farming, building, counting jars, and pretending you did not loudly recite love poems to a loaf of bread in front of the high priest. He'll never forget, but mercifully he'll never speak of it. You finish sweeping. You eat a leftover date. You watch as the final embers of the festival fire hiss into ash. Your stomach rumbles. You think, next time I'll pace myself. You lie. You're dead again. Don't panic. This time, it's intentional. The linen wrapping ceremony was thorough. The priest said the right words. They even stuffed a few extra amulets in your armpits just in case the gods were feeling picky. Your tomb is sealed. You're now officially in the Egyptian afterlife. And the first thing you notice, there's wine. Everywhere. The field of reeds, their version of paradise, isn't just a serene farmland under a golden sky. It's got date palms, barley fields, wide canals, and the biggest eternal buffet you've ever seen. And right in the centre, next to a lotus pond with ducks that do synchronised swimming, a divine tavern. The beer is cold, the cups never empty, and no one cuts you off. Let's get historical. Ancient Egyptians didn't just believe in an afterlife, they planned for it like it was a second wedding. Their tombs were packed with the essentials: food, clothing, furniture, jewellery, board games, scented oils, and booze. wine jars with harvest years and vineyard locations, beer jugs sealed with wax painted with spells for freshness, even tiny clay models of breweries and bakers so you'd never run out of the good stuff. In the tomb of Car and Merit, non-royals mind you, archaeologists found actual preserved wine with labels that read, "very fine," which is ancient Egyptian for, "you'll forget your name after 2 cups." You sit on your celestial mat and sip from a cup that never empties. You're surrounded by friends, ancestors, pets that died 30 years ago, and that one guy from your village who owed you bread. Still awkward, even in death. And they're all drinking, because drink was part of divine joy. The goddess Hathor, lady of intoxication, the god Ra, sometimes needed a beer bath to calm down. The dead, constantly receiving libation offerings from the living, beer poured onto tomb altars, wine sprinkled into the earth, prayers whispered into cups. This wasn't just ritual, it was room service. Even the Book of the Dead includes drink spells. One popular line, "May cool water and sweet beer be poured for me in the next world that I may drink and be refreshed." Another tomb inscription reads, "Give to the car of the Blessed One a jar of beer, a cake, and cool water, every day, without fail." Every day. They were serious about their post-mortem happy hour. You watch as a new arrival floats in, still confused, still wrapped in linen, carrying a spiritual suitcase full of guilt. You pat the mat beside you and pour them a drink. No judgment here. The afterlife has room for everyone, even the guy who once dropped a wine jar on the pharaoh's cat. And the best part, no hangovers, no festival cleanup, no crocodiles, just warm breezes, soft music, and the gentle clink of clay cups as you raise a toast to immortality. You drink, you sigh, you smile, you made it.